these dating apps are showing like that there's a small percentage of men, something like in the single digit percentage of men, who are getting all of the matches, all of the conversations, all of the women who want to talk with them. And then the rest are essentially, as you said, invisible. And these dating apps are showing this. Now, historically, evolutionarily speaking, because I feel like this is sounds like a relatively new problem.
It's not the monogamy argument.
Right, because there's arguments that we created monogamy, although now in every successful society, this is what's practiced. But for a lot of human history, that wasn't the case. And you had the man with the resources and the military and the harem. And then you had the peasants, and they just didn't have accessible women. And so the argument is that we created monogamy, and it was a way to keep us peaceful and not killing each other and all that stuff. So it's like we've now this kind of natural tendency where all the women want these few men and all these other guys are invisible. Now it seems like we've amplified that with technology and accessibility. And that's what we're kind of seeing right now. Is it that guys are just giving up and that women are working harder? Is that part of it, or is it more than that?
There's an awful lot going on. So Richard Reeves, guy that wrote Of Boys and Men, really great book, short read. Everybody should check it out if they're interested in this. And he talks about the structural problems. Men are dropping out of education, employment, and family life. Why it's happening, it seems like girls mature more quickly than boys. Everyone knows that. They hit puberty earlier than boys. But there's other things. They're on average more conscientious, which means that when it comes to sitting down and doing homework, they're better. More boys have got ADD. More boys are restless and boisterous when it comes to class. That doesn't engender a very successful education outcome for guys. There are 4 times as many female fighter pilots in the US Air Force as there are male kindergarten teachers by percentage in the US. 2% of kindergarten teachers are men, 8% of fighter pilots are female. I'm happy to have a discussion about whether there should be more female fighter pilots in the US, but there absolutely needs to be more male kindergarten teachers because they understand how to deal with boisterous boys, right?
Oh, I see.
So the monogamy argument is an interesting one. It seems to me that almost all human civilizations throughout history, ancestrally, were monogamish, right? So this polygyny argument really only begins to make sense once you've got agricultural revolution, because no one man can accumulate sufficient resources to be able to look after more than just him and his local family. So for anybody that says you do have this huge polygyny thing going on and everyone's a wannabe Genghis Khan, no, not up until 10,000, 12,000 years ago. And you can tell by there's some genetic records, there's some anthropological data that suggests that it's just not the case. It's not. Most of human history was monogamish. Serial monogamy, perhaps, but it wasn't this polygyny where it's one man with an entire harem of women. Because how would you, in a normal local tribe, if you don't have tons and tons of resources, how are you not going to stop all of the other men just tearing you apart? Mm-hmm. And this is a problem called young male syndrome. So we've spoken about individual happiness and stuff. We probably need to justify why people need to get into a relationship at all. We can do that in a bit. But societal stability is something to be concerned about. If you have a ton of men who are not bought in to the local society, why should they behave? Why shouldn't they cause havoc? If they've not got a partner and they've not got kids, their testosterone is higher because getting into a relationship drops testosterone, and then having kids drops it again, which reduces risk-taking behavior. Why shouldn't they just go around and push over granny and set buildings on fire and stuff? They've got nothing else to do. And this has happened throughout history. Portugal in the 1700s, they actually shipped off all of the sons that weren't the first son. The first son got married off, and the rest of them were put on galleon ships, and they got to explore the new world. What they were doing was they were outsourcing these roving bands of future miscreants, and they were just exporting them out of the country. So young male syndrome is this situation in which a proliferation of childless, sexless young men cause havoc for society. Given that we've got ever increasing rates of sexlessness amongst young men and young people generally, where is all of the rioting? That's a valid question. Incel killings, for all that a lot of the killings that do occur, especially mass shootings, do come from young, lonely men. There's nowhere near it. It hasn't tripled in the last 10 years, right? So why is it not going up in line? And this is a theory that I've come up with, which is the male sedation hypothesis. So it's my belief that men are being sedated out of this status-seeking and reproductive behavior through porn and video games. I think that video games gives them the team bonding, goal-seeking, forward-oriented satisfaction that they need. And I think that porn is giving them a very, very, very slight titrated dose.
Careful, you're touching a third rail that it wasn't a third rail that long ago. Yeah.
You know,
we talked about video games the other day.
A lot of guys
backlash on that. Don't come after their video games.
You know, the pornography conversation is interesting because this is relatively new. I mean, pornography's existed for a long time, but not its access. I make the joke on the podcast all the time that, you know, when we grew up in the 90s, if you had a dirty magazine in the 90s, you could literally trade it for some kid's bike. That's how hard it was to come by. And now it's so accessible. It's interesting. Have you interviewed anybody to talk about the impacts of pornography on men and society and what that could potentially do to us?
Yes, I've had a couple of conversations that actually contradict each other. So Dr. David Ley is very anti-porn panic. And I need to dig into a lot more of what he talked about. He said that people are overblowing the concern when it comes to porn.
Really?
Yeah, which is the first guy that I've ever heard to talk about this. But he's deep in the research. On average, I think that porn is a pretty destructive force for men. And the main reason that I think it is that guys who are in relationships and use porn are less likely to have sex with their partner, right? So you're less likely to satisfy your partner because you're able to satisfy yourself. Aside from that, downstream from that, your partner may start to wonder and worry about why are we not having as much sex. If you're single, it's going to promote you to go out and actually get laid less. Like if the only way that you can get sex is by finding another woman, you're going to be very motivated to go out and find that woman. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you can get your rocks off at home on your own, then that's not going to be the case. Andrew Huberman said to me on a really great episode that people should check out about how porn watching can train people to become aroused when they're watching somebody else have sex, but that doesn't necessarily translate over into when you're one-on-one with somebody in the real world. Man. So you can actually, there is a potential concern that you could neurologically program yourself to become a voyeur. And that is a pretty big concern. I mean, there's all sorts of things that are happening as well with like young kids that learn about sex through porn and then have super skewed perspectives of what sex is supposed to be, how you're supposed to do it, et cetera, et cetera. This is, I guess, more of a concern for women about how men treat them. But like, if you're a guy, you want to treat a woman well, right? You don't want to be doing something that she's going to absolutely detest or hurt her. So, yeah, the porn panic thing. When it comes to video games, again, I don't know. I haven't seen the data on this. I do need to speak to some like gaming addiction people. However, it wouldn't surprise me if the question still remains: if young men aren't having that much sex, where is all of the unrest? Right? Yeah, it manifests online in forums and stuff like that, but it's not happening in the real world, and it should be so prolific. This isn't me like campaigning for go out there and burn down your local fucking CVS, but something's happening. And the two things that men would typically want would be camaraderie, goal seeking, and reproduction.